These towering structures are chimneys made by tiny termites, working around the clock as a team to help ventilate their complex and sophisticated underground city that lies deep underneath the soil. People, too, have a knack for building towers. We find man-made towers of all kinds everywhere on the face of the earth and from every historical epoch of human history. Wherever towers are found, they say something about those who built them. They are all constructed with a distinct sense of purpose and necessity. Their construction requires enormous group effort, close coordination and communication, manual skill, and a great deal of money and natural resources. Towers also serve powerful religious purposes, such as for the worship of the gods and for sacrificial ceremonies dedicated to them. So towers go beyond any utile purpose they may have, and often take on mythic and symbolic meaning. In our modern world, for example, living at the top of a high-rise tower penthouse is a symbol of power, wealth, and privilege. Now there are, and have been, famous towers throughout time, but perhaps no tower in ancient antiquity has gripped the human imagination quite like the Tower of Babel. It has been depicted by artists and writers in many different ways over time. The story of the Tower of Babel is found in the Old Testament book of Genesis, chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Although the story of the Tower of Babel is a mere 9 verses long, speculation and discussion about its meaning could fill volumes. For Jewish and Christian scholars, the Tower of Babel is more than merely the story of how the world's languages came into being. Just as Icarus's hubris led him to fly too close to the sun and come crashing down to earth, with the Tower of Babel, man overreaches in an attempt to become like God. But is the story of the Tower of Babel really about human pride, as it has been taught in Sunday school for hundreds of years? What exactly is this short, strange story really about? Let's take a deeper anthropological dive into the meaning of the Tower of Babel. Before the Tower of Babel, we learned of the story of Noah and the ark. In Genesis 6, we learn that man multiplied after the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and that man's wickedness was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But a man named Noah found grace in the eyes of God. So God decides to spare Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, along with the male and female species of all the world's land animals, insects, and birds. The great flood then started when Noah was 600 years old. The flood comes and wipes out every living thing that lives on the land. Apparently all the fish and underwater creatures survive. After the flood, it is then up to the 8 human beings that were spared to repopulate the earth, as every other human being has been wiped out. We are then given a chronology of the children of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. There is mention of a man named Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, whom we are further told founded a city named Babel in the land of Shinar. And now we are ready to start the story of the Tower of Babel. The story begins, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. In the context of what we've just learned, this would have to be a true statement. The world was repopulated by 6 people after the flood, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, so it makes sense that they and all the generations after them would only know one language. Language as a unifying factor in society is the central theme of this story. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So we learn that the people after the flood lived nomadic lives until at some point they found a place where they decided to settle down and build a city and a very high tower, so that no matter where they might wander on the face of the earth, they could presumably see it and find their way back home. The story tells us they developed a new technology of brick and mortar that permitted them to build higher structures than if they simply used stone and mud. The narrative informs us that these people take pride in who they are and are able to coordinate complex building projects amongst themselves for the good of everyone. When they say the top of the tower will reach unto heaven, Christians and many others assume this means the people are so full of pride they believe they can actually build a tower that reaches heaven. But at this point in the story, the concept of a heaven, or even a hell, as Christians understand them, have not yet been developed. So there is no heaven for anyone to reach, or any hell for anyone to be condemned to. Rather, the phrase merely points to the building of a very high tower. The tallest buildings in the world do not scrape the sky. They are just very, very tall. So the text here simply states, these people are building a very tall tower so that it can be seen by everyone for miles around. There is also no mention of the tower serving as a religious center for the worship of any god or gods, or to make sacrifices. It does not seem to serve any religious purpose other than simply as a visual marker for all the people to orient themselves by. In verse 5, we read, And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. By the way, that's also the title of this cool movie. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So that's it. That's the entirety of the story. What is clear from the text is that one day God took notice of these building activities and came down to take a look. He came to see the city and the tower. So his inspection tour was not just to inspect the tower, but also to see their city as well, their roads, their houses, their infrastructure and organization. After his inspection, he is totally impressed not only by what he sees, but by the unity of the people that made all of this possible. The people is one, he says. God then attributes their oneness and their achievements to their singular language. Moreover, God finds that human unity, human oneness, is potentially so powerful that nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. God was so impressed by what they had done that he imagined them capable of an almost limitless level of progress. Now that should be the message of the Tower of Babel. And we all know this is true. Every momentous human endeavor, all human achievement, is a cooperative effort of many people working single-mindedly toward a goal. There literally is nothing that restrains us when we are all united toward a common goal. That's what God is saying in verse 6. Landing on the moon is but one small example. It took thousands of people, all speaking the same language, all on the same page, to put one man's foot on the moon. That is the powerful message hidden in this little story. The more unified people are, the more they are able to accomplish. But for reasons we are not told anywhere in the text, God decided that the best thing to do here was to confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. We are given no reasoning behind this action. It seems to just come out of nowhere. The flood story tells us that God is an emotional God. He repented having made man. He has regrets. In later stories, we also find God being angry, as well as expressing jealousy. But God's decision to confound the language is not attached to any emotion. God just does it after previously expressing amazement at the city and tower of the children of men. As written, the text seems to hint at a little bit of jealousy on the part of God. Could God have perhaps feared they could challenge him, since nothing will be restrained from them? The text simply does not say. Thus unable to communicate effectively, the people's entire enterprise, their city, and their tower, falls into disrepair as everyone branches off with their own language groups, to be scattered abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth. As such, the story can only serve as a simplistic and supernatural explanation for the origin of the diversity of languages. It easily explains why the Egyptians speak Egyptian and the Greeks speak Greek. In an imaginative story, a child can understand. The story of the Tower of Babel begins as the story of one language group, and ends with the origin of the various language groups and their disbursement across the globe. Aside from explaining the origin of the world's languages, the story contains the sub-theme of human unity versus human division. The story starts with the gain of power with human unity and ends with the loss of power in human division. When the people spoke as one, they progressed, they built things. When they no longer spoke as one, all progress ceased. Their buildings lay in ruins. Indeed, no people can build anything unless they can understand one another and can agree on a common goal. And language is what makes that possible. The moral of this story, if there is one, would be this: together we stand, divided we fall. And if the goal of God was to prevent humans from building cities and towers elsewhere, that goal has been an utter failure. For the world's language groups that were scattered across the globe have all gone forth and built their own separate cities and towers as symbols of their now separate identities. We could lay the birth of nations to the Tower of Babel. But the Tower of Babel is just one short story amongst the many other fantastical stories that are found in the book of Genesis, whose meanings have been interpreted beyond what the text actually says to suit higher ideological purposes. Those higher ideological purposes can be negative or positive. Thus, the Tower of Babel can be read as a cautionary tale about human pride or idolatry, as virtually all religious scholars do, or as an uplifting example of how nothing can stop us when we all speak the same language. The choice is yours. So the next time your priest, or pastor, or rabbi, or religious leaders uses the story of the Tower of Babel to preach to you about the evils of human pride, how God has to put us in our place, I want you to pause a minute and think instead about the awesome potential of the power of human unity, the importance of human cooperation and goodwill. Let's all try harder to understand one another as best we can, instead of being scattered like the people from the land of Shinar, in the lost mythical city of Babel that has long since vanished with the sands of time. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe if so moved by the spirit. Until then. From the Primadina TV channel, adios, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, sehr gesund, au revoir, and arrivederci. Good night.